So in this segment, we're going to be talking about the UK urging the EU not to harm British firms in US power fight. So essentially, what you have is a battle between kind of the US and now the EU between for green subsidies, and the UK are not willing to compete in that because this government don't believe in subsidies or understand much. With the green revolution kind of coming on its way in terms of manufacturing. And so what you have is Joe Biden really pushing a lot of American manufacturing via subsidies, and the EU looking to retaliate, so they don't get left behind. And the UK saying, please don't hurt us, we did nothing. So the UK is urging the European Union not to harm British companies as European leaders debate whether to match measures in the US Inflation Reduction Act with massive green subsidies of their own. So Rishi Sunak's administration are concerned that while the US law risks cutting market access for British companies, any EU retaliation magnifying the damage, the EU is concerned that the US is unfairly subsidising American companies and is debating a response. So it looks like the US bill is aimed at producing more green energy in the US via manufacturing more renewable energy sources. I don't know the exact terminology, things like wind turbines and stuff like that. It also goes further to producing electric vehicles, also in the US with a lot of subsidies, moving manufacturing out of not just China but the Far East in general, potentially Mexico as well. The EU are looking at making their own version of this plan, as it puts European manufacturers on the back foot if the US are heavily subsidising their own industries. So it makes sense as to why the US and the EU are looking to do this. You can really boost domestic manufacturing whilst dealing with the climate emergency at the same time. The issue is that the UK won't do our own version of this, which puts us at a massive disadvantage. Setting up or retooling a factory is very expensive. Shouts out Gamers Nexus for covering that sort of stuff. And if you are going to set up shop, why would you do that in the UK when other countries are offering you subsidies and bigger markets? If you look at the US as a market and the EU as a market, it's way bigger and way richer than the UK is. I think Sunak's fear is that UK companies, even those based abroad, or maybe have subsidies abroad, maybe cut out our supply chains in favour of US or EU-based companies, depending on whose plans you're looking at. This should be the least of Sunak's concerns, as this sort of stuff will greatly damage the UK's foreign direct investment and UK manufacturing in general. That's what he should be concerned about. Car manufacturing is at its lowest in the UK in 66 years, and the US and the EU will further make these issues worse for us, which I'm not blaming them for. They are desperate to be on the next wave of, I guess, the green manufacturing wave, as oxymoronic as that sounds. The UK is so far behind, we're not even in the game yet. British ministers and diplomats have privately warned that EU counterparts that devising counter-proposals for their own clean power subsidies would be unfair on British firms and could breach international laws, according to people familiar with the discussions. They said it risks fomenting a global trade war. The EU has had similar concerns about the US Act, and why would the EU care about British manufacturing? The only bit they would care about is in Northern Ireland, as that's part of the EU single market for goods. That's about it. It could be seen as a breach of the WTO rules or the Trade and Cooperation Act. The EU have taken the UK to court over favouring UK manufacturing over EU competitors, and we were taking WTO court over that. So the UK could do the same thing, but the WTO is slow, and Trump decimated it, absolutely decimated the WTO. The WTO being a political court as well, so the EU could try further cases against us. This is a game of chess effectively, and we don't know how to play. The behind-the-scenes manoeuvres illustrate the weakened hand British diplomats have in the wake of Brexit, caught between the might of the US and EU economies, whereas in the past the UK would have been part of any EU retaliation. It now risks the double whammy of being harmed by the US and any European response to it. We are caught effectively between two superpower or economic superpowers. I don't think it would be a stretch to give the EU such status. They have three G7 members after all. All we can do is beg the EU not to do this, and they could easily say your concern is noted, but this doesn't really concern you anymore. At the root of the transatlantic trade dispute is President Joe Biden's $369 billion plan, a dollar plan for subsidies and tax breaks to boost green industries and cut greenhouse emissions. European leaders have warned that the incentives, climate programs and environmental mandates will lure investment that would otherwise flow to Europe, and they're probably right, especially if US companies can offer cheaper prices for parts or finished products due to subsidies. But not the EU. The EU are not taking the US to the WTO courts. They are talking about fighting more socialism with their with their own socialism. European President Ursula von der Leyen has proposed a new fund to support European green transition, and French President Emmanuel Macron called for an EU package amounting to 2% of its economic output to rival US plans. French and German economic ministers have said Europe must match the US scale of subsidies. The UK is seeking a collaborative approach with the EU to counter the US plans, an official said, while conceding that with Britain now outside the bloc, it's found itself stuck between the two sides. And I doubt the EU will put us within the programme, even if we did help put some capital in, because manufacturing in the UK comes at a much bigger cost. I'm not talking about staffing costs, but there is a shortage, so add that to the list. But also, the import checks are subject to customs and other checks. The exports are subject to similar things, but worse, which are costs that add on to manufacturing. So why would you bother cutting the UK in at all? This is good for the EU, I think, in a lot of different ways. This scheme, but the UK are just so far behind. It's unreal, and it's very painful. So far, the UK has focused on privately lobbying the Biden administration to make amendments to the law rather than devising its own subsidies. That's driven in part because many UK ministers are ideologically opposed to protectionism and strongly believe in a free market. The person said British officials also fret that China may benefit if supply chains for batteries are disrupted by competing protectionist measures by Western powers. And I don't really know how China benefits from this at all. If anything, China are going to be worse off from this because trade deals, trade agreements typically have things like rules of origin. So if the batteries are made in China, they're going to face tariffs. So, the British government's using these arguments just don't make any sense. And we're moving into an era where developed nations are trying to take control of the next era. I guess you could call it the green era. But the Tories just don't get that, and that's why manufacturing in this country is struggling so much. It goes beyond just the chip shortage and other things, like the actual global factors. Countries in the EU are offering a lot more in terms of subsidies and other things to car companies and other kind of manufacturers. So why would you pick the UK over an EU member state? There's a reason why foreign direct investment isn't doing as well post Brexit referendum than it was pre-Brexit referendum. The UK is not seen as a safe bet anymore. And with the corporation tax increases, amongst other things, the staff shortages, the energy costs, why would you set up shop in the UK unless they're offering you some serious dough to either retool an existing factory that you have or to set up a new factory when you have so many other good options? I still can't believe Spain are the fifth. They produce 1/5 of electric vehicles in Europe. Like, that's wild. I didn't know Spain were kind of on a manufacturing footing like that. But it goes to show you that, if you can offer, I don't know what Spain specifically offer, but why would you set up shop in England rather than Spain? It wouldn't make sense if you're an electric vehicle producer or if you produce any other kind of green good. What makes you make, the decisions you make? Because at the end of the day, if a country is offering you capital and a decent starting point, why would you not go there? But anyways, I've rambled on long enough. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Like, comment, share, subscribe, support the channel on Patreon if you can, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one.